Welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel says it carried out strikes in Iran that killed 2 senior officers from the Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, one of whom was hit in Qom, the other in West Tehran, both reportedly involved in operations linked to Palestinian militias. Home Minister Amit Shah says India won't rejoin the Indus Water Treaty. Water flowing to Pakistan will be used domestically after a terror attack in Kashmir. Delhi says there is no reason to uphold a deal that helps Pakistan while putting Indians at risk. Russian President Putin suggests Russian troops could advance on Sumy, calling all of Ukraine ours in comments about a border buffer zone. Ukraine's foreign minister slams the remarks as proof Moscow isn't interested in peace, only more land and bloodshed. European ministers met Iran's deputy foreign minister in Geneva, pushing Tehran to engage with the US on its nuclear program. But Iran refuses talks while Israeli strikes go on, with Trump set to decide on possible US action within 2 weeks. Columbia graduate Mahmoud Khalil walks free after a judge rules his detention linked to pro-Palestinian activism was unconstitutional. The judge found no flight risk or danger as Khalil called his release a long overdue step towards justice. US Vice President J.D. Vance says Marines and National Guard will stay in Los Angeles amid immigration protests and blames local Democrats for encouraging illegal entry. Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass dismissed his claims as false and nonsense amid tensions over federal raids. Panama imposes a state of emergency in Bocas del Toro after protesters looted shops, torched a stadium and took over an airport. Clashes over pension reform left 1 dead and dozens injured as authorities blame radical groups for the unrest. Japan scraps its annual defense meeting with the United States after the Trump administration demands Tokyo boost military spending, the Financial Times reports. Secretaries Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth were set to host Japan's foreign and defense ministers on July the 1st. Now our top story this hour in the latest turn of events in the Iran-Israel conflict. Foreign ministers from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation have assembled in Istanbul, with the Arab League's Extraordinary Ministerial Council also set to meet ahead of the summit. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is taking part in both sessions, where Israel's strikes on Iran are high on the agenda. Araghchi has just issued a fresh statement. Let's hear what he had to say.
What we are doing right now is the exercise of our legitimate right for self-defense against the act of aggression, which is done against us unprovoked and in a very brutal way. In order for us to come back to diplomacy, the aggression should be stopped. It is obvious I cannot go to negotiation with the United States when our people are under bombardments, under the support of the United States.
Israel has carried out a second strike on Iran's Haitian nuclear site. According to a military official, the latest overnight attack has further damaged the facility and dealt a heavy blow to Iran's centrifuge production capabilities. This marks the second time Haitian has been targeted since the war began. Meanwhile, tensions flared in northern Israel after a drone struck a 2-story residential building in the Beit Shean Valley. First responders from Magen David Adom rushed to the scene but reported no casualties. In another strategic strike, Israel confirmed it has killed Saeed Izadi, a senior Iranian officer and key coordinator between the Iranian regime and Hamas. The strike took place in the city of Qom, south of Tehran. Izadi headed the QUDS's Forces Palestine Corps and was responsible for military coordination with the Palestinian militant group. As the war drags on, regional leaders are sounding the alarm. A senior UAE official, Anwar Gargash, has called for an urgent end to the fighting. Speaking to reporters, he warned that a prolonged war could bring serious consequences for the entire Gulf region. We're now joined by our guest, Professor Madav Nalapat, who's the editor of the Sunday Guardian and based in New Delhi. Professor Nalapat, thank you very much for joining us. Professor Nalapat, these updates are coming in hourly, it seems. A to and fro of missiles and drones between mainly Tehran and Tel Aviv, other areas obviously being hit as well. But what we're focusing on here is the strikes on Iran's Isfahan nuclear site. Do you think Israel is still defending, or is it now taking the fight deep inside Iran and risking more of a regional firestorm?
Look, I'm not sure about a regional firestorm. I don't think any other country in the region, even including Qatar, is at all in a hurry to join the firestorm. I don't think so. But the reality is Israel is not going to stop. It is not going to stop until it has completely destroyed the Iranian nuclear program. And no matter how long that takes, I don't think, judging by the rate the Israelis are going, it will take more than a few weeks more. But they're not going to stop until they do that. And whether it's the United Nations, which of course naturally is calling for an end to hostilities, or whether the Europeans are telling the Iranians something, they're basically telling them, you please stop without Israel stopping bombardment, which frankly is tantamount to surrender. They may want to stop, but they cannot publicly declare that they're stopping. Their nuclear capabilities. The reality of the situation is that this is going to continue until Israel or Israel and the US together destroy Iran's nuclear capability. Because so long as the clerical regime is in power, the fact is Iranian nuclear, any kind of nuclear capacity on the part of Iran is a threat to all the countries in the region and broader in several parts of the world. So I don't believe the Iranians are going to stop. Basically trying to hit back at Israel in whatever way, because their precondition for talks is Israel must stop the bombing, and Israel is not going to stop the bombing. That's going to continue until all Iranian nuclear facilities are eliminated as a consequence of the clerical regime, basically having long ago, in 1979, declared a war against not just the state of Israel, but the entire Jewish people. So go back to 1979, and that policy has continued till now. Supreme Leader now is equally emphatic on that. So I don't believe this is going to stop anytime soon.
Professor Nalapat, in the backdrop of this, there is diplomacy going on. We saw Iran's top diplomat in Geneva over the past 24 hours negotiating with Europeans. They've also released a statement that as Israel continues its strikes, it won't negotiate with the United States. How effective do you see diplomacy being in this war? There's a lot of conflicts going on in the world right now. Some experts say will be solved with diplomacy. What are your thoughts on the circumstances here?
There's no question of diplomacy. For a simple reason, the Europeans don't have any influence over Israel. The only country with some influence is the United States. And Donald Trump has made it very clear Iran must completely disarm before he is ready to start talks with it. In other words, you first surrender and then we'll talk. I mean, the terms of surrender, whatever it is, the fact of the surrender is going to even more seriously compromise the clerical regime, which is already facing unrest across Iran as a consequence of the economic hardship, not to mention the incessant bombing that they are suffering as a consequence of the clerical regime. So again, The only country that counts is the US. And the US is not going to ask Israel to stop until the Iranian nuclear capacity is degraded to zero. And if necessary, the US will get into the fray. I don't think that will be necessary. All that the Israelis will ask for is US supplies of adequate bunker busters and all that. And I don't believe they're going to be denied that, given the close security bonds between the US and Israel, especially during the term of President Trump.
Professor Nalapat, if we could just briefly touch on Donald Trump's decision making. He's given this 2 weeks to see if the US gets involved. What would happen if he didn't? We know that they have the military capabilities to penetrate this Fordo base in Iran. What are your thoughts if Donald Trump holds back from this war in the Middle East?
Look, I would be very surprised if Donald Trump is holding back on supplying the Israelis whatever they need to eliminate the nuclear capacity of clerical Iran. He has made that public, that that's what he wants. And I think it'll be much better for the United States if they don't get directly involved in the war, because they have a lot of assets across the region. And that is what is scaring many countries there, that US assets located in their territories is going to be under threat from the clerical regime in Iran. So I don't think Trump is in a hurry to get into the conflict directly, but I do believe he's going to keep Israel supplied so the Israelis can do the job. You remember in the Second World War, Winston Churchill said, to the United States, give us the tools and we will finish the job. That's exactly what Israel is saying to the United States now. Give us the necessary weapons and we'll finish the job of denuclearizing Iran.
Professor Madav Nalapat, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Always a pleasure. For our next story, we stay in the region where Israel's military has confirmed that its navy struck a Hezbollah infrastructure site near the southern Lebanese city of Naqoura. The strike came a day after Israel's foreign minister warned the Lebanese armed group against joining the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran. According to the Israeli Defense Forces, the targeted strike was used by Hezbollah to advance terror operations against Israeli civilians. The escalation comes as Lebanon's health ministry reported that an Israeli strike killed one person in southern Lebanon on Friday. Israel said the target was a member of Hezbollah, the Iran-backed group. Israel has continued to carry out near daily strikes on Lebanon despite a November ceasefire with Hezbollah and an unprecedented bombing campaign it launched on Iran last week. Israeli officials have stated that they will continue military operations in Lebanon until Hezbollah is fully disarmed. We now move over to Europe, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the country is developing interceptor drones to counter Russia's intensifying drone assaults. Kyiv reports that over 400 drones were launched by Russian forces in a single night, including Iranian-made Shahed drones, causing casualties and infrastructure damage. Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine have completed another prisoner of war exchange, part of agreements reached during recent peace talks in Istanbul. Hundreds of captured troops were freed, though exact numbers remain undisclosed. Tensions have escalated as Russian President Vladimir Putin said he does not rule out a possible attempt to seize the Ukrainian city of Sumy. Let's listen in to his statements.
В Сумской области глубина составляет где-то 10 до 12 километров. Где-то там 8, 10, 12 километров. Дальше город Сумы, областной центр. Но у нас нет такой задачи забрать Сумы. Но в принципе я этого не исключаю.
Ukraine's foreign ministry condemned the comments, calling them proof of Moscow's disdain for the peace process. The US President Donald Trump stated that the United States should not be required to meet NATO's 5% GDP defense spending target, arguing other alliance members should contribute more. We now move on. In a major development, President Donald Trump has announced that the United States is close to securing trade deals with both India and Pakistan, among other countries. During a June the 20th briefing, Trump expressed confidence in negotiations. Let's take a listen in to what he said.
As you know, we did a very great job with India and Pakistan, and we had India in. It looks like we're going to be making a trade deal with India. And we had Pakistan in. It looks like we're going to be making a trade deal with Pakistan. And it's a beautiful thing to watch.
As his administration pushes for bilateral agreements with countries such as Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom, Trump's sweeping tariff strategy, including a 10% tariff on almost all imports, is pressuring nations to reach agreements before a July the 8th deadline. He also suggested that if talks move fast enough, an extension could be avoided. As time runs out, the global trade landscape could soon experience significant changes. Let's now turn back to the Middle East, where the United Nations is urging more international support for Syria's reconstruction efforts after 14 years of devastating war. This is in order to speed up the return of refugees. He spoke from Damascus on June the 20th. Let's take a listen in to what he said.
About 1.5 million, 1.4 million are people that were displaced inside Syria and have gone back to their homes. And 600,000, this is an important figure, are Syrians from the neighboring countries. They were refugees in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Turkey, and in other countries and have returned. We work with all the governments in the region, the neighboring countries and the authorities here in Syria to help people go back.
That was Filippo Grandi, the UNHCR chief. While over 2 million Syrians have returned, many still face major challenges, including a lack of housing, jobs and basic services. Grandi emphasised that sustainable returns can only occur if the country is rebuilt and infrastructure is restored. He also discussed with Syrian authorities the need to encourage donors to provide more resources for the reconstruction. With Western sanctions recently lifted, Syria's new government is hoping for international support to launch rebuilding efforts, which could cost over $400 billion. We move on once again. A former Haitian mayor has been sentenced to 9 years in a US prison. Jean Moros Villigna, who's 53 years old, was convicted of immigration fraud in Boston. He lied on his US visa application by hiding his role in political violence. Prosecutors say Villigna oversaw killings and torture in Haiti as a mayor. He ruled the rural towns of Les Irois from 2006 to 2010. During that time, he allegedly led attacks against political opponents. In one 2007 incident, Villigna's men fatally shot a man and beat his brother. A year later, 2 men were shot and beaten at a local radio station. Villigna falsely stated in 2008 that he was not involved in political violence. That lie helped him get a green card and settle in Massachusetts. He worked as a truck driver and claimed innocence during the trial, but prosecutors called it one of the most serious types of immigration fraud. He was also found liable in a 2023 civil case in order to pay $15.5 million. His victims had sued under the US Torture Victim Protection Act. Villigna is appealing both the civil judgment and the criminal conviction. Now let's turn to the Indo-Pacific, where the China Coast Guard says it expelled a Philippine vessel from waters around Dao in the South China Sea, claiming the ship had entered Chinese territorial waters. According to a Coast Guard spokesman, the Philippine vessel, identified as 3006, ignored repeated warnings and attempted to approach the disputed area. The Chinese Coast Guard vessels responded by surrounding the ship and firing a water cannon warning shots to force it to withdraw. The CCG also employed gradually escalating measures, including verbal warnings, tracking, monitoring, and expulsion tactics to expel the Philippine vessel. Spokesperson Leo Dijon stated that all actions taken on site were professional, standardized, and legitimate. This comes as the Philippines, Japan, and the United States conducted joint Coast Guard exercises off Japan's southwest coast in a show of maritime unity. The drills included search and rescue operations, evacuation simulations, and maritime law enforcement drills. They mark the second time the three countries have held coordinated Coast Guard trainings and the first to take place on Japanese territory. Tensions in the South China Sea have escalated in recent months, with China reportedly asserting sweeping claims over the region. China and the Philippines have engaged in months of confrontations in the South China Sea, despite an international ruling that the assertion has no legal basis. Tensions between China and other claimants to parts of the East and South China Seas have also pushed Japan to deepen ties with the Philippines and the United States. We're now joined by Jim Rice, who's a professor of international law, and he's located in Vigan, the Philippines. Jim, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Jim, we see the South China Sea reoccurring, coming up in headlines continuously. If you could explain a little bit about the region, what China claims and what actions does it take when people enter these waters that it claims as its own?
Thanks very much for having me on. I really appreciate this chance to explain to your listeners the degree to which China has inflicted its aggression on the Philippines and on the entire region. You asked about the history. In the late 1940s, China unilaterally declared that essentially the entire South China Sea belongs to China and no other country, regardless of their histories, regardless of their maritime claims and their dependence upon fishing and the region. So China has unilaterally declared this. Meanwhile, other countries such as Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Taiwan have basically been relying on customary international law. Subsequently, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was entered into and became part of international law, and which, by the way, China signed and ratified, as did the Philippines. And then, of course, China proceeded to break all of the promises and the declarations that they made under the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention. So essentially, what's been happening in the past several years is that the PRC has been plundering the environment, stealing the fish, and banning Filipino fishermen from their own fishing waters in contravention of international law. In 2013, the Philippines brought China before the Permanent Court of Arbitration, claiming that China was in violation of the international law. And the international court ruled in favor of the Philippines. China chose to illegally ignore the ruling. Now, of course, China has stepped up its aggression. And if I can just say, I would object to your use of the term Huangyan Dao, because that's the Chinese term, which is essentially bogus. The international term is Scarborough Shoal. And, you shouldn't be buying into Chinese propaganda talking points.
Yes, we will bear that in mind. Jim, you've said that China has ignored international law. Will it face any repercussions for this? Is there possibility for it to face any legal repercussions? And do you see the possibility of this situation escalating? I mean, these water cannons and verbal warnings were used against this Philippine ship. However, do you see in future the possibility of the events turning out in a more severe manner?
Well, they've been doing this for nearly a year. Your question is really good and has got several points. Last year, I believe it was in August, in an attempt by the Philippines Coast Guard to resupply its outpost, they in one of the Philippines shoals, the Chinese illegally and thuggishly attacked the Philippine Coast Guard sailors, wounding several, cutting off a thumb of one of the sailors, and destroying a lot of the equipment owned by the Philippines. As per your other question, which is what can be done about this, under the Biden administration, the United States was engaged in building up a regional alliance of the Philippines, Australia, Japan, and the Philippines in order to band together in order to deter Chinese from further aggression. But this is very serious for us in the region. I live right on the West Philippine Sea. We prefer to call it the West Philippine Sea and not the South China Sea. But regardless of the name, the aggression is very real and the threat is very real.
Yes, Jim Rice, thank you very, very much for your insight on the program. We move over to South America for our next story, where hundreds of supporters of former Argentine President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner gathered in Buenos Aires, Ledesma Park, on Friday, June the 20th, as the left-wing leader addressed them via audio message. Kirchner is currently serving a 6-year sentence of house arrest for graft, has been communicating with her followers from her apartment after the Supreme Court upheld her conviction for a fraud scheme tied to public projects. Despite the sentence, Kirchner, due to her age, was allowed to serve at home. Her influence over the left-leaning Peronist movement remains strong even after their loss to Libertarian President Javier Milei in 2023. Kirchner continues to claim that the charges against her are politically motivated. We move on once again. A Tunisian court has sentenced former President Moncef Marzouki to 22 years in prison in absentia, accusing him of undermining state security. Marcusi, a vocal critic of the current president, Kais Saied, who has said to rule by decree since 2021, is currently living in exile in Paris. This marks the third conviction against Marzouki, with previous sentences totaling 12 years. Marzouki dismissed the rulings as invalid and vowed democracy would return to Tunisia. Meanwhile, another court handed a 15-year sentence to Sabi Atig, a senior official in the main opposition party, and on money laundering charges. This follows recent harsh prison terms for multiple opposition leaders, including Abir Mosi and Hauchi, amid growing fears of an escalating crackdown on critics in Tunisia. We stay in the region once again. Morocco experienced its hottest year on record in 2024, according to the country's meteorological agency, which confirmed the trend of rising global temperatures. In its annual report, the agency reported a temperature anomaly of plus 149 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the 1991 to 2020 average. Officials said every month in 2024, except for June and September, was hotter than the historical average for that period. Several cities set new daily heat records, including Marrakesh, which hit 47.6 degrees Celsius, and Beni Mellal, which recorded 47.7 degrees in July. Now we move back to Southeast Asia. Sugar member of K-pop band BTS is officially set to complete his military service today, marking a full return of the Korean supergroup. BTS has been on a hiatus since 2022 as all 7 members completed their mandatory service in South Korea. Sugar, who served as a social service agent, effectively finished his duty this week after using his remaining leave. In a message to fans on Weverse, Sugar said he missed them and thanked the BTS army for waiting. He also apologized again for last year's drink driving incident. With all members now back, BTS is expected to make a massive return. Analysts predict HYBE's profits could jump 71% next year, thanks to their touring. BTS has long been a symbol of South Korea's global cultural power, even visiting the White House in 2022 and donating to social causes like Black Lives Matter. Band leader RM recently appeared at Art Basel in Switzerland, while V was seen at a recital in Seoul with filmmaker Park Chan-wook. The world now awaits BTS's next chapter, expected to be their biggest yet. We stay in the region. North Korea is dealing with heavy rainfall across multiple regions, including the capital, Pyongyang. State media reported widespread downpours, triggering weather alerts. Authorities issued warnings for central and northern provinces, including South and North Pyongyang, Jan, and South Hamgyong. Pyongyang alone recorded 140 millimeters of rain in just over 24 hours. Video from state media showed rain-soaked roads and residents navigating the streets with umbrellas. However, Reuters notes these clips could not be independently verified. So far, no reports of casualties or significant damage have been confirmed, but authorities continue to monitor the situation as weather conditions evolve. Well, that is all we have time for, and we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.